Tonight, Laikipia is burning. Who's fooling who? The bandits, the land, the owners, and an endless cycle of arrests. Also, the death before the birth, the unusual life cycle of the One Kenya Alliance. Plus, the fall and fall of Jubilee Party, the noise, the mess, and the casualties. And the impressed pressure where Guru returns to EACC, graft, politics, or both. On Yvonne's take, the insanity of doing the same thing in Laikipia and expecting a different result. Jamila sends a memo to you at the public rally. What are you thinking? On the punchline, Gashuri's crystal ball on the briefcase parties and all. And on the angle tonight, the lessons that we have refused to learn about the new curriculum. Linus is away tonight, and our sign language gangster in the house is Yula Nzale.
Hata wakati hiyo ingine tulikuwa tunakaa huko na hata mzee yangu akauliwa huko.
Msidi hata nani kutuombea tupate usalama. Mimi nasikia mimi niko na homa sauri ya kulala huko msituni nikitorokea majangili.
Tuangalie nyuma hivi tukaona ameingia msituni. Sasa tukajua ni maadui.
Sasa sio watu hata wanasimama barabara. Mmoja akaingia msituni. Sasa vile tumesimamisha pikipiki ndio tusimame wakatokea wote barabara.
So distress calls there, voices of distress, I should say, coming from Laikipia, confusing situation as you can clearly see. And Yvonne, this is deja vu. I mean, Laikipia, year in, year out, every time you hear there's insecurity, 1 in 3 times it's going to be Laikipia because this just keeps festering.
It does. Samagina did an excellent story tonight, just talking about the arrests of the 2 leaders that we've seen and chronicling the number of times they've been arrested over this very issue. Both Lempurkel and William Kamket,
yes.
From Tiati, and not just, with what's happening there, but also, at the Kapedo, which is the border with Baringo. And it just tells you that this is something we've gone through over and over, which is why, for me, it's important to understand, the heart of the issue. Yes, there are criminal elements. Yes, there are bandits, but there's a way in which we frame it that then just doesn't tell us the whole story. So we have bandits, and then we do what we like to do in this country, which is called a crackdown. So we send in the police and we send in the military. But at the heart of it is to understand Laikipia. Many of us are familiar with the cosmopolitan side of it, Nanyuki town, which has, a lot of communities. But Laikipia is, majorly has the pastoralist communities. You've got the Samburu, the Pokot, the Jemps, the Somali, hi Jamila, the Boran, and a number of other pastoralist communities. She will need to
declare interest at this rate.
She should. Now, these guys don't typically live here all the time. As we said, they're pastoralists, they move around, and many of them move from the north coming down towards the south in Laikipia based on, climate in search of pasture and water. So right now it's dry. And so, of course, the areas that, are stressed, that's why they're coming down to Laikipia. So what are the issues at heart is you have land and access to that land. And, of course, you've also got the land tenure system. You've got the big landowners. But you've also got all of these people who are being pushed and stressed by the climate change issues, by the drought, looking for pasture. And then they come and Laikipia becomes this melting pot of violence. That is not to say there are no criminal elements. They do exist. But to frame it as simply criminal is, I think, for me, missing the point. So you've got, the issue of land, and you've got all of these ranchers who own hundreds of thousands of acres, and they fence those off. And then you've also got a push and pull between conservation and the pastoralist way of life. And so all of these are the issues that are at play, which is why they've not been solved, hence this cycle of violence. And I just want to add, it's important to note that this doesn't happen in places like the Mara, for instance. Why not? This doesn't happen, for example, with the Karamoja. And we've also framed it as, these communities against each other. For example, in a place like Kamwenje, where you've got, a more cosmopolitan area of farmers, coming in to settle and buy their pieces of land, away from the issue of the land, the big landowners, like the ranchers. So it's not merely these communities fighting against each other. It's not merely political. It's not merely criminal, but it is a melting pot of all of these factors. And until we address it as such, we're missing the point.
And those are excellent points you make, Yvonne, and we could try and strip this down to its small parts. I mean, let's deal with the basic question, Francis, of the criminal aspects of this, because, I mean, at the end of the day, we've seen in this country almost everything acquires a criminal dimension, in the sense that, you know, criminals know how to take advantage of situations that have underlying causes that no one is talking about. And I think Laikipia is a typical example of that, where you have all these deep-seated historical questions that have been simmering under the surface, and suddenly it flares up, and then we'll go and arrest people. And it's interesting, Yvonne was telling us about the chronic nature of these arrests. I mean, when you look at the two legislators, how many times can one person be arrested? I mean, can't someone just, if they have a case to answer, why don't you just take them through the process, let them be jailed if they're guilty and everything? Maybe that will deal with the criminal aspect. Because I think why this is so puzzling to me, that even the very basic thing of people who are accused of having been involved perhaps in organizing for someone's house to be torched or for someone to be killed or whatever, because that is, there's no underlying reason that can justify that kind of thing. So dealing with this basic question seems to be a big problem. We have big headlines, you know, so-and-so has been arrested, but at the end of the day, we will not know what happens. Then Laikipia will come down, and then maybe a time like this next year, William Kamket or someone else will be arrested, and we will not even know what happened, and we wait for the next year.
Joe, the criminal element or the criminal nature of this discussion is as a result of land ownership issue, the scarce resources that are at play, but there's also the political question that we cannot run away from. Look, the guys who attack people's farms, raid, take away animals, kill some, are armed. Guns are not sold in a kiosk. It's not like a packet of milk or a pencil or a biro pen. You know, these are items that are procured through a very systematic process. So until we address the root cause of where do they get the guns from, it was George Natembeya, the regional commissioner himself, talking about the kind of weapons that the attackers have vis-a-vis the kind of weapons that the law enforcers have.
And I think we have that sound bite, if I'm not mistaken.
Let's play it first.
Because ukiangalia kwamba hawa jamaa wanapata constant supply ya chakula, constant supply ya risasi, constant supply ya bunduki. Bunduki sio kitu ambacho utaenda kwa duka nunua na shilingi 5. Bunduki ni kitu kwa very expensive. Zile bunduki ambazo nazo zile sio tu mtu yote anaanza kwenda kununua bunduki na alete. Lazima kuna mtu ambaye ana facilitate.
Precisely.
But that's a startling admission coming from a very senior government official that these people have constant supply of guns. You know, when you see a government official, you know, dressed up in the manner that George Natembeya is, and they're telling you that there are some fellows somewhere who have a constant supply of guns. That's not so reassuring.
To me, this is organized crime. For whatever reason or whichever word you may want to use it, all colorful words here, this is organized crime. And it is organized crime because it has direct beneficiaries and indirect beneficiaries. When these attackers come, raid, take away animals, hide them, let's say, in the conservancy or anywhere else, it means there's someone who is organizing them. There's someone who is financing them. There's someone on whose behalf these attackers are doing this, and with some level of protection. I mean, when the regional commissioner talks about constant supply of arms, constant supply of food, then it shows you it's an organized thing. There are beneficiaries, and the benefits are economic. Yeah? If you had 200 heads of cattle and you have some young boys who you can organize to raid, and you have 1,000 plus or thereabout, these animals are not for fun. These animals are for sale. And once you sell them, you make money. So there are big financiers who benefit from this business. So until an unless the government addresses the criminal nature, the organized criminal nature of these attacks, we will have this discussion every year.
And that is a layer, Jamila is coming in. Jamila, and that's a layer on top of the underlying questions, because I think that we are very good at animating those kinds of things and then creating a whole enterprise around this thing, because where there is grievance, people in this country will find an enterprise around it. Where there's a cultural practice, people find an enterprise around it, much like they've done with the whole question of cattle rustling and whatnot. So here's a question where there's organized crime that is layered on top of very deep questions. But I'm going back to this thing of the politicians who somehow you find them in the mix, even when something looks like this is a question of insecurity.
It's true, Joe, because when I was listening to Natembea speaking, and he talked about some rich individuals, some leaders who are involved, I was waiting for him to name them. Because if you're going to say ni fulani, sema basi, ama is it these two gentlemen who've been arrested, the former member of parliament and the current member of parliament, who are involved? If that is so, then just say it clearly who they are. Because now when yes, we say politics is involved, but sometimes we politicize things a bit too much. I'm saying this in terms of now looking at all the underlying issues we've mentioned, and Yvonne has talked about it, and we've said that yes, there are criminal elements, but there are other issues in terms of the pastoralists who live in the area. We say they're probably being armed and funded and by whoever these rich individuals are or who they are. But then we need to look at things like traditional knowledge in terms of who these people are. Yvonne talked about how now things have changed. We have fences now, land is being fenced. People cannot graze as much as they want to, as how they were used to in the past. But then these people have a lifestyle. The way they move around with their cattle, the way their lifestyle is, it's hard. If you're not fighting your neighbor, you're trying to fight, maybe the government is a secondary person you're fighting because you're fighting your neighbor for land, you're fighting your neighbor for pasture, and that has nothing to do with politicians. When they move from one place to another, they look at the weather patterns. Like you're saying, they know I need to move north during this period and I need to move south during this period. These are the people who hata kwenda kuwapatia chanjo, you have to go look for them. They're the people you have to look for to even vote. They're the people you have to look for to try and get them to come to the polling station. So they are all over the place. Politicians cannot make people look for pasture because this is what they've been doing. A herdsboy will do it from when they're born all the way until he becomes a herdsman. That's their way of life. So sometimes maybe you do not need to politicize this as much as we're doing because these people have a way of life. Yes, you are saying they're being armed, but we've had instances of arms naingia. There's a way for them to get it. The arms which were used in El Ade found their way into the country and used in crime. What happened in Turbi, what we see happening in areas of Marsabit. It is possible for people to get arms. So we need to look at this situation in terms of now who benefits when we have conflict like this. We've had 12 people dying in the past 1 month, including 3 police officers. And you look at how bold some of these attacks are. They surrounded a GSU camp, about 40 of them. Yeah, and when even our crew was there with Natembea and his team, there was an attack about a few kilometers away.
One of the more brazen attacks actually happened at the start of this so-called
when the Security Advisory Council, I think, just left, and there was an attack, and 40 houses were burnt.
There was the one 2 kilometers away from where Natembea was addressing the
Yes, and the lady said, they've just been here, you know, they've just attacked us. And it's so bold that they're being told, tunakuja. Yeah?
But there was an interesting admission, I don't know if it was a misspeaking by George Natembea. He appeared to be suggesting that these people had more sophisticated weapons, Yvonne, and I know this. We've tried to walk back on that, but that was interesting. Food for thought in terms of what kind of weaponry are these people using that makes them so bold that they would actually conduct such daring raids and all kinds of things in the midst, right in the midst of what we have been told is a security operation zone.
I don't know if we have it, but you know, he did say that they've got M16s, while you know, the Kenya Security Forces have AK-47 rifles
and G3s.
But, you know, also to just, what I found interesting was he appeared to suggest that some of those weapons are the ones similar to those that are used by the British forces that train, you know, in Nanyuki, commonly known as Batuk, and, you know, wondering how they came out. So it's interesting for me that a government official would say something like that, which could potentially be a diplomatic incident, you know, from one country to another.
A big one.
A very big one. The British forces are not here. They're here at the invitation and welcome of the Kenyan government, and they do train with our forces, you know, as well. And if you've passed there, you know, it's a pretty vast area. But I think also for me is again, the history of understanding what is happening in this area. It goes beyond just saying they've got more superior weapons. However, they're also better able to use them. And for that, you take a look at what's happened in history. There's been a big proliferation of arms in this area. I mean, many will remember going, you know, decades ago from, you know, the fall of the Siad Barre, you know, administration and all of that time, which then made our borders porous, to having all of these arms that are coming into the country. And for many of these people, it's a way of life. These are people who are very well trained in using some of these sophisticated weapons. You know, and at this point, you know, we have been talking about some of these issues. You know, our colleague in a different media house, Dennis Okari, actually did an investigative piece where he was talking about these young soldiers in these, well, I shouldn't call them soldiers, but these young people in these areas who are so well trained and who are able, you know, to use these weapons
almost like
with
a rite
such
of
accuracy.
passage.
It is like a rite of passage.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's not simply about they've got superior weapons, but it's a lot of these things that you need to take a look at. And for me also, you know, just that we're talking about the arrests, and if the government says this is sponsored, how many times will these people get arrested, and why is the government not able to arrest them once and for all, get the evidence that is needed, and get these cases to their conclusion? Here's one. Matthew Lempurkel, the former legislator, who was arrested just this week, was arrested 12th of March 2018. He was arrested on allegations of, you know, planning to commit murder. He was arrested on the 22nd of July 2017 when he made what was considered to be a statement of incitement, talking about, you know, the few ranchers who are owning thousands of acres of land at the expense of the locals. He was arrested again in 31st of July 2016, and actually then a Nanyuki court ruled that he had a case to answer on incitement of violence. I'd like you to notice the time. It is between March and around this time, March, April, May, June, July, August. William Kamket was arrested in January of 2021 over insecurity in Kapedo. He was arrested in 29th of October 2014. At that time, there was a killing again in Kapedo of 5, including 3 Jesuits. How many times do they have to be arrested, you know, and charged in a court of law? You know, what does this mean? It's becoming a farce, and it's starting to look like no wonder you have those daring attacks, because these guys are like, you know, what you gonna do? We need to find a lasting solution.
And you mentioned these underlying questions, and I think it would be great to kind of talk about them a little bit more, because the land question in this country is emotive. I mean, we can't run away from that fact. And whenever there is a sense of grievance, whether it is founded in fact or not, but the fact that that sense of grievance is there and it is passed on from one generation to another, there's always going to be a problem, and there has to be an active process by which the local community, because I mean, there's no one who can sit here and say, come on, go into someone's piece of land, however big it might be, whatever questions there might be, you know, about acquisition and all of those things. There's no one person who has a right to just walk into something and take it over. But I think the bigger question is, if there are people out there who have difficulty kind of even making ends meet, and then every time they're passing there, they're seeing all these big ranches, it is very easy also, even for the politicians to come and say, hey, look, what is going on here? So there has to be an active process by the government of making sure, how do you involve these communities in what is going on there? A lot of those places are used for conservation and everything, and traditionally people understand vast areas to have belonged to them at some point. So because now it's all been part of a modern economy, there has to be creative ways in which this local community is involved in what is going on. If it is, you know, whether it is proceeds from the conservancies or whatever, finding creative ways of recognizing that these people are here. Because, I mean, as a student of conservation, I know that there's no conservation that happens in a vacuum. People have to feel that whatever wildlife exists here is not better than them, that actually the livestock exists because there are people around to take care of them. There is nobody. I mean, even if you look at all the wildlife in this country, a majority of them actually are just out here on people's land and everything. And there has to be that active process that helps people to understand that these things can be beneficial to them, and therefore they go out of their way to look at them favorably, to help in taking care of them. But the moment people feel a sense of resentment where they look at these things and say, we actually are suffering because of the elephants and whatever, even the very conservation itself is imperiled. So I think that these questions are difficult in as far as issues of that nature in this country are discussed, because we gloss over them because they can easily explode. But the question is, are you going to do that forever? Because clearly, as Yvonne has been saying, I mean, this is something that has been going on, and there's no evidence even right now that this crackdown is going to sort out some of these things. Because
Joe, when you talk about, sorry Gashuri, something Joe said that I need to respond. When you talk about historical injustices, when you look at Laikipia itself, we look at the Anglo-Ma Treaty, 1904-1911, for the resettlement of some of the Maasai, and what was agreed during that period is still in force till now. Remember the issues about the 99-year lease, which is supposed to have that had been over between the year 2003, 2004. But then now there are even efforts to try and sort of like say that this land needs to revert back to the community, and all that issues that came up because of that brings, as you say, some sort of resentment in people's hearts and minds, in terms of now they sit there and they say these huge tracts of land and they believe that it should belong to them. But Joe, you raise a good point that these issues have to be addressed. Otherwise, we'll still keep seeing what we are seeing again and again and again happening, because it's like using a bandage to try and stop a big wound. It will not work. It will leak. So you need to find lasting solutions. Look at where these issues are coming from and try to find a way of dealing with them. Because, again, the frequency of what's happening, the loss of life, the loss of property. We look at the people who were speaking when we looked at the soundbite, and the fear of having to live and hearing gunshots. The fear of not sure that you'll sleep tonight without being attacked is not something anyone should live with, especially in a country such as ours.
Sorry, I just wanted to add, because I know we're going into a break, and you are the student of environment and conservation. So I say this with deference to the expert in the room, but there's been, for me, a romanticization of what wildlife conservation looks like, and we forget, with all due respect to the big landowners who are doing quite some work of it. It's bringing in millions of dollars in terms of tourism, but we did understand wildlife conservation before the concept and idea of conservancies. The local communities had found ways to live with the wildlife and having their cattle as well. And it's not that we are short of examples. Like I said before, the Mara, with the inclusivity that is, that is being done there. If we also want to look at examples, let's take a look at how President Museveni has handled the issue of the Karamoja, who are also pastoralists just right across our borders. If you're looking for even more examples, take a look at Spain, because sometimes we think pastoralism is a way of life for Africans. In Catalonia, they are, pastoralists there, and what they have done there is pastoralists are actually given passage through parts of the city at specific times of the year based on the climate, as they're looking for pasture for their livestock. We're not short of examples, but we just have to fix it and look at it in a more holistic manner.
Yvonne, that idea that you talk about, it is called the idea of the wilderness, the unspoilt wilderness that is separate from human beings. Because initially, I mean, like you said, people in these parts of the world, we lived with wildlife, but then there was this notion that somehow humans were the problem for wildlife, and therefore the idea of protected areas came. Protected from what? It is protected from all of us, you know? So, and that is the beginning of the problem. What you're talking about is this notion, this notion, and you call it a romanticized view of conservation. And I think it's at the heart of what's going on, that you are doing conservation apart from human beings, and you can see what's already going on right now.
Roba is demanding a break, but once we come back, we will, after the kizungumingi of conservancy, we will now try and talk about some things that are easy to understand, like, where the weapons come from,
Yep.
and whether these operations are a painkiller or a radical surgery.
Okay.
Take us to the break.
Let's
The
go to
break
the-
doesn't take itself.
Let's take a break.